How working with our emotions helps us be more creative. Hello, this is Douglas Abbey, author of the Creative Mind series of sites. That is the title of one of my articles on this broad topic of emotion and creativity. Here are some brief excerpts of perspectives in the article. Psychologist Cheryl Arutt notes, creating art has always been a way to channel emotional intensity. Gloria Reuben says, if I didn't have acting and music, I would burst from all of the emotion inside. My embryonic admits, it sometimes makes me uncomfortable to feel so many big feelings all the time. See the notes for link to the article with much more, including videos and links to resources. This audio is a quote podcast conversation unquote based on text in the article and generated by an AI program. I really appreciate the quality of the authentic sounding voices and the range of ideas they cover.
Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be looking at emotions and creativity. You sent over a really interesting collection of articles and quotes and even some insights from actual psychologists. So we're going to unpack all of that and hopefully learn something new about how emotions can actually drive the creative process.
You know, it's funny how we often think about creativity as this purely intellectual pursuit, but I think when you really look at the research and the experiences of artists, it becomes pretty clear that emotions play a huge role.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And one of the first things that jumped out at me from all the material that you shared was this idea of intense emotions actually being like the fuel for creativity.
Right.
Like, remember that quote from Gloria Reuben?
Oh, yeah.
If I didn't have acting and music, I would burst from all of the emotion inside. Like, wow, that's intense.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about all that pent-up energy needing an outlet. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not just about having a way to release those emotions either. It seems like those really intense feelings can actually be a source of inspiration and creative energy. You know, think about those moments when you're feeling super excited about an idea or when you pour your heartache into a song or a poem or something.
Yes. It's almost like those raw emotions give your work a deeper level of authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's interesting that several of the sources you shared touch on the idea of highly sensitive people.
HSPs.
Yeah.
Yes.
They seem to have a particularly strong connection to this whole idea of emotions and creativity.
Yeah, HSPs are individuals with a nervous system that's just more sensitive to stimuli. And that includes emotional stimuli.
Okay.
Elaine Aron, she's a researcher who's done a lot of work on HSPs. And she says they actually process everything more deeply, not just emotions, but this deeper processing of emotions, I think, really seems to play a key role in their creativity.
So it's not just that they feel things more strongly, it's that they're processing those emotions on a deeper level, and that somehow translates into creative output.
Yeah, it's like they're experiencing everything on a more amplified level.
I'm thinking about Nicole Kidman. She's been open about being a highly sensitive person.
Yes.
Could this be part of what makes her such a powerful actress? That ability to tap into those deep wells of emotion?
That's a really good question. And I think there's definitely a correlation between sensitivity and creativity.
Yeah.
But we also have to acknowledge that for many people, intense emotions can be overwhelming.
Right.
Even Mayim Bialik, who's, you know, a neuroscientist and an actor, talks about feeling uncomfortable with just the sheer volume of her feelings sometimes.
Yeah, that's a great point. We don't want to romanticize emotional turmoil.
Right.
It's about understanding that for many creative people, intense emotions are kind of part of the package. And the question is, how do you work with those emotions in a way that's healthy and productive?
Right. You have to find ways to channel them.
Mihaela Ivan Holtz, a therapist and author, talks about living in the full depth of human experience. It seems like she's suggesting that we need to learn to embrace our emotions, even the difficult ones, rather than try to suppress them.
Yeah, exactly. It's about finding a way to work with them, not against them. And this is where things get really interesting. Dr. Holtz also talks about the impact of unhealed trauma on creativity. She asks some pretty thought-provoking questions like, where does your desire to create come from? And is it rooted in joy or is it tied to coping mechanisms?
That's deep.
Yeah, and I think those are really important questions for anyone who's involved in creative work to consider.
Definitely. And I think that kind of leads us to the topic of anxiety, which is something that I think a lot of creative people struggle with.
Oh, for sure. It's very common.
In one of the articles you shared, Julie Bjelland, who specializes in working with highly sensitive people, She uses this great analogy.
Oh, I love her work.
She says that when our emotional brain gets activated, our cognitive brain basically goes to sleep.
Which makes total sense when you think about what it feels like to be super anxious.
Right.
It's like your brain is just flooded with all these feelings, and it's hard to focus or think clearly or access that creative flow state.
So we've got these intense emotions that can fuel creativity.
Right.
But then we have anxiety that can totally block it.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like finding that balance is key. And I'm curious, are there any specific strategies or techniques that people can use to kind of manage their anxiety and keep that emotional brain from hijacking the cognitive brain?
Yeah, there are a few things actually Julie Bjelland talks about, like training the highly sensitive brain.
Okay.
And it's not about, getting rid of those intense emotions. It's learning how to work with them more effectively.
Well, it's not about trying to become less sensitive,
right,
but about finding ways to kind of manage that sensitivity.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Do you have any examples from the material that you read?
Well, mindfulness practices came up a lot. It seems like they can be really helpful for becoming more aware of your emotional state without getting totally swept away by it. It's creating a space between, the feeling and your reaction to it.
Right.
Giving yourself a chance to choose how you want to respond.
I can see how that would be helpful. Mm-hmm. Instead of just reacting impulsively, you're giving yourself that pause to say, okay, I'm feeling anxious right now, but what do I want to do about it?
Exactly. And there's also somatic experiencing, which focuses on releasing trapped trauma energy from the body.
Okay.
This kind of ties back to Dr. Holtz's work on the impact of unhealed trauma on creativity.
Yeah.
She mentions therapies like EMDR, eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing, which can help people process those difficult experiences and kind of free up their creative energy.
It makes me think about that question that Dr. Holtz asks. Where is your desire to create coming from? It seems like understanding the roots of your creative impulses can help you work with them more intentionally. Maybe you realize that some of your creative drive is coming from a place of pain or anxiety.
Right.
And that by addressing those underlying issues, you can actually enhance your creativity.
Absolutely. And sometimes I think the most powerful creative work comes from exploring those, deeper, more challenging emotions.
Yeah.
But it's important to do it in a way that feels safe and supportive.
So far, we've been focusing a lot on the challenges of intense emotions.
Right.
But we can't forget that emotions can also be incredibly positive and inspiring.
Oh, for sure.
What about those quieter, more subtle feelings? Can they play a role in creativity too?
Absolutely. Think about the awe you feel when you see a breathtaking sunset or the quiet joy of getting lost in a creative project.
Yeah.
Those emotions are so nourishing to the creative process.
And those feelings can also come through in your work and connect with your audience.
So,
I think it was Mihaela Ivan Holtz who said that when you're creating from a place of genuine emotion, your audience can feel the depth of your feeling and your work truly speaks to their hearts.
It's that authenticity, that vulnerability that really resonates with people.
Yeah.
And it's not just about expressing those big emotions like joy and sorrow.
Yeah.
It's about bringing that same level of awareness and intention to all of your emotional experiences, even the seemingly mundane ones.
That's interesting. So if we're paying attention, even something like boredom could be a source of creative inspiration.
Exactly. Boredom can be a sign that you're craving novelty, that your creative spirit needs a jolt. It can be an invitation to explore, to experiment, to shake things up.
It's funny how we often think of stress as the enemy of creativity.
Right.
But one of the articles you sent talked about the concept of eustress.
Oh, yeah.
The American Institute of Stress distinguishes between stress and eustress.
Right. Eustress is that positive stress that comes from challenges that we feel equipped to handle.
Yep.
It's like the feeling of excitement and anticipation before a big presentation, or the adrenaline rush of performing on stage.
So maybe it's not about eliminating stress altogether, but about finding that sweet spot where stress becomes a motivating force.
Precisely. And that sweet spot is different for everyone. It's all about knowing yourself, your limits, and the types of challenges that light you up rather than burn you out.
All of this is so insightful, but I imagine it can feel overwhelming too. There's so much to consider. Any final thoughts for our listeners on how to put all of this into practice in their own lives?
Well, I think the first step is just to start paying attention to your own emotional landscape throughout the day. Notice when your emotions feel really intense and how those emotions are kind of influencing your creative energy.
Oh, that's interesting.
Maybe you discover that you're most creative when you're feeling a sense of joy or excitement. Or maybe you find that your best ideas come to you when you're working through feelings of sadness or anger.
It's interesting. We often talk about like finding inspiration.
Right. As if it's this magical thing that just hits us out of the blue.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what if inspiration is less about waiting for a lightning bolt and more about just tuning into what's already happening inside of us?
Yeah.
What if those intense emotions are actually like clues pointing us towards creative breakthroughs?
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a really beautiful way to put it. I think inspiration often comes from paying attention to those subtle shifts in our emotional state.
Right.
Those whispers of curiosity or excitement that can lead us down these unexpected creative paths. Maybe you wake up feeling a sense of unease.
Yeah.
Instead of ignoring it, what if you could try to channel that energy into like a new painting or a piece of music?
Yeah. It's like we're detectives of
Yes.
our own inner world.
Exactly.
Gathering clues and following these threads of feeling to see where they lead us creatively.
I love that analogy.
And sometimes those threads might lead us to places that are kind of uncomfortable,
Right.
to emotions we'd rather not deal with.
But remember what Dr. Holtz said about unhealed trauma,
Yes.
interfering with creativity. Sometimes the most powerful creative work comes from facing those difficult emotions.
Absolutely. It's like clearing out the debris to allow that creative river to flow more freely. It's not always easy, but it can be so liberating.
Yeah.
And I think that's where self-compassion comes in. We're complex beings with rich emotional lives. There will be times when our emotions just feel overwhelming, when anxiety gets the better of us. And that's okay.
It's about giving ourselves permission to feel the full spectrum of human emotions without judgment, and to recognize that those emotions are not a sign of weakness,
Right.
but actually like a source of power.
I agree with that. When we learn to work with our emotions instead of against them, I think that's when the real magic happens.
And that's when those emotions can become a source of connection too. I'm thinking back to Gloria Reuben's quote about how she would just burst with emotion if she didn't have acting or music. Creative expression gives us a way to channel those emotions,
Right.
to share them with the world, and to connect with others who might be feeling the same way.
It's like we're transforming our personal experiences into something universal,
Yeah.
something that can touch and inspire other people. When we create from a place of vulnerability and authenticity, we give other people permission to do the same.
And that's powerful.
So to wrap up our deep dive into emotions and creativity, I just want to leave you with this final thought. This week, pay attention to your own emotional landscape. Notice when your emotions feel most intense and see if you can find some creative ways to channel that energy. It could be through writing or painting, dancing, playing music, or even just having a deep conversation with a friend.
Yeah.
Just experiment.
Yeah.
Play, express yourself. You might be surprised by what you discover.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
Until next time, keep diving deep and keep creating.
Thanks for listening. See the Creative Mind post for this podcast episode with links to resources and other material.